Hello everyone, welcome back. So now I've got my image scratched onto the back side. Remember, this is traced on one side like this, so the Sharpie's on this side, and then what you do is flip it and then scratch or dry point needle your lines on the back side, so that way when you print it, it'll be the correct orientation again. So this is really important with like text or anything that needs to face a particular direction. You've reversed it this step, and then when you print it, boom, it's going to get printed this way and become a mirror image of itself. So I went ahead and dry pointed all those lines, and one thing that I didn't mention that is really important is as it's developing, feel it. And if you hear that, it should catch your fingernail and have a bit of a tooth or a scratchiness to it. So that way we know it'll hold ink. So I'm going to get a sheet of paper ready. And to do this, now remember, typically when we do something that's intaglio wiped like this, we would typically soak this Reeves BFK in water so it completely loosens up the fibers. You could, of course, if you have a small sheet of paper, you could fill your tub or sink with water, and you could submerge this in sink so that it becomes soaked. But if you don't want to do that, or if you don't have a big enough sink, or if your paper's too big, and if you don't have a paper tray, an alternative way of doing this is to completely saturate the paper with a spray bottle, or by holding it under the sink and running water on it. So I'm going to do this, and this loosens up the fibers of the paper. This is thicker Reeves BFK. We want to make sure it's completely soaked. And if you notice this, it's kind of like dripping. It's getting really glossy and it's getting kind of drippy. And then normally what we would do is we put this under, let that drip off, the majority of it, let it kind of soak for a little bit. And then we'd run it under blotter papers with a rolling pin, which I'm going to do now. But in the absence of that at home in your studio without those materials, what you could do is get a couple of old beach towels or bath towels and set those on there and then kind of just pat it down. It'll soak up the excess water. So you can put it between two towels. For now, I'm just going to, because we're hoping that the paper will really get saturated with water, I'm going to leave it under the blotters while I ink this up. The next step is to have something to work on. I sent y'all home with mat board to use. I'm using a glass slab. You could use a palette or use a piece of plastic, or mat board or cardboard, scrap paper, something like that. I sent y'all home with water-based ink. This is Speedball. This is block printing ink, but it should still be a decent enough viscosity to be able to print intaglio style. So I'm going to use my squeegee here and get a bead of ink and just put it on my mixing surface like this. Again, you might not want this straight out of the tube. You could mix it, add another color to it to get a little more sophisticated color. Do whatever shade tint that you want. And then next what you're going to do is you're going to use this piece of mat board as an applicator. There's like a little squeegee to apply your ink to the surface of your plate here. And what will happen is the ink will stick to those lines, and you should put ink everywhere, including your non-image area, so you have a consistency and tone. So even in those areas that you don't have scratched lines or image, pull the ink there. Otherwise, it sometimes will stand out as being kind of separate from the rest. Normally what we would use next is tarlatans, fancy tarlatans, and each one a certain color to wipe this. But in the absence of that, what works really nice is a paper towel. So this is something you should have at home, paper towels, even though a lot of people are going crazy and buying TP and paper towels. Maybe there's still paper towels in your house. This works really good because it is rough, but not too rough, and it's absorbent, but not too absorbent. So a paper towel is really good, whereas something like a t-shirt or a rag would be too absorbent, and it's going to pull too much of the ink up. The next step, and I'm just going to kind of crumple this up to make it a little bit softer so it doesn't pull up too much ink too quickly. Then what I'm going to do is put the insides into the center like that, kind of tuck it, And I've got a sheet of newsprint, and I'll move this down so you can watch me ink this up. I've got a sheet of newsprint down here, and this is going to be handy. And one paper towel, by the way, is probably not going to do it, so make sure that you have paper towels nearby, and you can repeat this step. But what's nice about this is I can be you're going to do kind of this wax on, wax off. If you've watched Karate Kid, you're going to pull the ink where it shouldn't be, where the plexiglass is still smooth, and pull it onto the newsprint. You see where it leaves the residual ink out here? That's good. So you're not really kind of like aggressively wiping the plate. You're more sort of like polishing it. And at first you can kind of pull a lot off, but then when you get to it, you're just pulling a little bit off at a time. And as I said, one towel is probably not going to do the trick. It's going to start to get clogged up with ink and just push ink around as opposed to pulling it off. So I'm going to get a new towel here. Same thing, crumple it up, kind of soften it up, and then put the inside like this, kind of ball it up and put the extra on the inside so you have this nice, smooth, rounded surface here. At first, I'm going to kind of pull a lot of excess off my non-image area first. We call this plate tone. If you look at Rembrandt's etchings and dry points, he intentionally left a lot of plate tone in some of his images and used that for tonality, so that's something you might explore in this as well. What starts to happen, though, if you notice as I'm developing this, is it's pulling away from the areas that it shouldn't be, and it's kind of sticking to the spots that it should be, where it's got that toothiness of the dry point scratched lines. I can also kind of move to a different section of the paper towel to where there isn't much ink, and it'll lift off more and then move it back to an area that's inky when you're in kind of like a more sensitive area that has some subtle lines to it. So this is developing up pretty nice. You can see the pink is sticking to those scratched lines. Again, this is not on the Sharpie side. This is on the opposite side that we scratch. And this looks pretty good. So next we're going to do is we're going to print this. And I'll show you how to do that. But first I'm going to wash my hands really quickly and grab my paper. And probably a good idea to fold this over so we don't get any ink on our paper or our print. And I'm going to toss these. And now I'm going to blot my paper. So this is something that you might have your paper ready to go and just waiting between the towels. So now it should, when I touch this to my nose, boop, it should feel cold but not like soaking wet. And I'm going to set this on top of my plexiglass, and I'm going to use my wooden spoon. Because the paper is damp, it's going to press down better into the sort of the recessed areas, the crevices of this, and pull out those dry point lines. And you can take a peek at it and see how your lines are developing. They're looking pretty good. Make sure you get everywhere. And voila. I'd buy that for at least $1.50. I don't know if I'd call up the Louvre and see, you know, if they're ready to accept another masterpiece, but not bad for a little 20-minute demonstration. This is some alternative dry point monoprints to be able to do at home and work on a surface like this as opposed to etching or doing a dry point on zinc or copper. Another thing that you could use, and this is something that my students know, but maybe some of you out there in the printmaking circles haven't used before, is you could also use a compact disc. Those are becoming really obsolete. You could use the back side of a CD if it doesn't have a lot of scratches or smudges on it. You could draw first with Sharpie and then scratch your lines into the CD and then use that to print. The other thing is you might not have Reeves BFK, or you might not have thicker paper to use. That's okay, because you can, and we might even have enough residual ink on here. This is just a standard piece of copy paper. Obviously this isn't archival, but perhaps you can have some thinner paper like calligraphy paper or Eastern paper or something like that. It's going to be thinner, and in which case you probably wouldn't even need to soak it. So I'm just going to kind of see if I have enough residual ink here to get sort of a, remember what that's called? A ghost print or a cognate print. See if I can pull enough image off here. And, well, not really, but you can see here where I had, this is, I think I used the screw as opposed to some of the lines that are X-Acto knife. You might be able to print this still. If I were to ink this up again, you could print this on thinner paper as well. You wouldn't necessarily have to use Reeves BFK. So for me, you know, this is really an exercise in taking the printmaking studio and having it in your home. I remember right when I graduated from undergrad and before I went to graduate school, I didn't have access to a printmaking studio or a press or anything. So I was doing like DIY bathroom, like screen printing. I was developing screens in the shower and doing really just kind of simple things, because you want to still work with these ideas, but you might not have access to a great facility like at your school or your institution. So one of those things that I think is a plus, is a positive in this, if there's a silver lining in all of this, is, yeah, we're working from home, but think about maybe pushing ourselves, you know, pulling away one element, restricting access to one thing, but maybe that frees up and allows us to experiment and work with other materials. So, and I mean, I think if you think about Senefelder, that's essentially how he discovered lithography anyways, right? With, oh, I'll try this because there's this limestone that's from Bavaria that they used for paving. I'm going to write a note on here, right, his little laundry list. And then, oh shit, I can develop that. I can make an image out of that, right? So maybe some of you that are at home right now, maybe you're going to discover the next printmaking process and technique because, you know, the invention aspect of like, oh, I can't use this material. What if I try this? So I think it's interesting to see what people are developing. I've seen some people making gel plates out of like melted gummy bears in an Altoid tin. So some really cool stuff. I'm signing out. Peace out. Be safe, all of you. Bye.